Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon. Welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast, a platform for women in agriculture, ranching, homesteading, and more to share their stories. I'm your host, Caitlin Dubin. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's very special episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. I say very special when really they're all very special to me, but this one in particular, I got to talk to who I picture as very much a celebrity here in Canada, and also happens to be the youngest woman who I have ever had the privilege of interviewing here on the Rural Woman Podcast, and I am very excited for you to get to meet her. Mady Adamson is a fifth-generation Saskatchewan grain farmer. She is passionate about agriculture education and sharing what she knows to her social media pages as well as her classroom titled Learning About Ag with Mady. Mady is currently in grade 4 and in her spare time enjoys dancing, watching hockey, and reading. Since Learning About Ag with Mady began in April of 2021, Mady has had the opportunity to meet many wonderful people, work side by side on some great projects, and appreciates all the support she has received. My heart is bursting right now, and I am so excited for you all to get to meet Mady. Before we get to her interview, let's go over this week's listener review. This week's 5-star rating and review is titled So Encouraging. A friend of mine recommended that I start listening to this podcast when I announced that I wanted to start a produce farm. I've dreamed of being a produce farmer or just a farmer in general ever since I was little. I started listening to this podcast and now have more confidence in myself than I ever have. If I fail, I will try again. This podcast and the women who speak on this podcast have encouraged me to be brave and to do what I've always dreamed of doing. I would recommend this podcast to anyone. You don't have to be a farmer, rancher, or anything like that to listen. I think it's just a great podcast for all women and a great podcast of women supporting women. Well, thank you so much for that kind rating and review over on Apple Podcast. And my friends, if you are listening to this show and enjoy listening to this show, I would encourage you to leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, as this is a great way for others to be able to find the show. And now I don't have any patrons to welcome to the patron community this week over from Patreon, but I do want to say a special thank you to Carrie, Allie, Cheryl, Irene, and Rebecca for helping me reach my goal for the first quarter of 2022 in receiving 5 new patrons to the show. So again, thank you so much to these 5 incredible women, as well as all of the other incredible people who support me over on Patreon. Your financial support has been how the Rural Woman Podcast has been able to reach its 3rd anniversary recently as of March 19th, 2022. I do have more to share after Mady's episode of some changes and exciting things that will be happening for the Rural Woman Podcast starting in April 2022. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with the very special Mady Adamson. Hello, Mady. Welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you today?
I'm great.
That is so good. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. Like I said before we hit record, I am probably your number one fangirl.
Thank you.
So, Mady, for the listeners who are unfamiliar with you, give us your background and tell us how you got your start in agriculture.
So I've kind of just grown up on the farm. My mom's a farmer. My papa's a farmer. I just grew up on the farm. It's what I grew up loving.
That is so great. And Mady, for the listeners who don't know who you are, tell us who you are. Tell us your name and how old you are, what grade you're in.
I'm Mady Adamson. I am 9 years old. I'm in grade 4. I live in a small town called Kindersley, Saskatchewan, and our grain farm is just north of Rosetown, Saskatchewan.
You know what, Mady? I have been to both of those places. Can you believe it?
Cool.
I know exactly where you are on the Saskatchewan map. So, Mady, tell us how you ended up starting to share your story in agriculture with others.
Back when I was in grade 3, my grade had been talking about agriculture, and I realized that my classmates didn't really know how agriculture worked or where their food came from. So I made a few videos on the farm, and we posted them on social media, and then they seemed to get popular. So I decided to make a series of videos following the farming year.
And what were your initial videos that you shared with your class? What were those videos about?
So we did a seed treatment video, a seeder video that explained how the seeder worked, and a video about different kinds of crops.
And were any of your classmates surprised with what they saw?
I think so.
Yeah.
They looked surprised.
Were they surprised that you knew how to run this equipment or how it worked?
Yeah, a few of them.
Yeah. How many farmers are in your class, would you say?
Well, there's me and 2 of my other friends are farmers.
Yeah. So what kind of questions do your classmates ask you about farming? What were the things that they didn't know?
Well, they asked me what kind of equipment we used, what different crops we grow, things like that.
Yeah. Why do you think it's important for you to share this information with your classmates and others?
I think it's important so that they understand and appreciate where their food comes from.
Right. Well, and I think that's important, right? Because we all need to eat. So they need to know how that food was grown and where it came from.
Yeah.
So what is it that you grow on your farm, Mady?
For pulses, we grow peas and lentils. For oil seeds, we grow canola and flax. And then we also grow wheat and barley.
That is a big variety, hey?
Yeah.
What do you think is your favorite crop to grow and why?
I really love flax because the flowers are purple and purple is my favorite color.
You know what, Mady? I love flax fields. They are so pretty.
Yeah. Yeah, my grandma loves them.
That's awesome. Well, and you know, when people think of agriculture and they think of big, beautiful fields, I think canola gets a lot of, acknowledgement and recognition, but I think the flax fields are prettier than canola.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Mady, do you have any animals on your farm?
Not anymore, no. Sometimes my uncle's dog comes out with them, but that's it.
That's it? Okay.
We do have a lot of cats. We do have a lot of cats in our barn, though.
Well, does that make you a cat rancher, Mady?
Maybe. A little.
I think it does. I think that means you're a cat rancher.
Maybe.
Maybe. So, Mady, what do you think has been the best part about getting to share your story?
I love when somebody comments or tells me that they've learned something from my videos. But I really, really love meeting people and what I've learned. I've made some very good friends out of this, and we're just egg farmers. And I haven't grown up with livestock, so I really enjoy learning about livestock.
That is so great. Mady, what do you think has been if there has been any challenging parts about sharing your story for you.
I don't think there's been anything challenging. I just love it all.
That's great. Well, and you're so good at it. And Mady, I have to say, I'm so impressed about how articulate you are when you are sharing your story and what you're doing on your farm. You make it so it's very understandable for folks that are your age and even somebody as old as me. You've taught me a lot of things from your farm.
Thank you.
What advice would you want to give someone who might be more nervous about sharing their story?
My advice is simply go for it. Don't think about the people watching it. Just have fun with it.
That is a great piece of advice. What do you think has been the funnest part? What have you learned the most through sharing this, and what has been the most enjoyable part for you?
I think it's meeting people and learning things and people telling me that they've learned something.
Right. What kind of opportunities have you gotten from sharing your story with your classmates and on YouTube?
So, a week or so ago, I went to Agribition and I made educational videos showing what Agribition had to offer. And in January, I'm going to the Manitoba Ag Days and Crop Production Show.
And what are you doing in Manitoba, Mady?
I'm going to be a speaker at the Manitoba Ag Days.
That is so great. And what are you looking forward to most when you are in Manitoba?
I'm just looking forward to learning everything I can and meeting new people.
That is great. They are so lucky to have you there. It's going to be a really great time, I'm sure. Women's work clothes suck, or at least they used to before Rolling D Workwear. Rolling D Workwear specializes in crafting women's workwear that is comfortable, functional, and professional looking. This is workwear that is designed to fit your body. You'll love the classic stylish cuts and high-quality craftsmanship that makes Rolling D the most comfortable women's workwear out there. You don't even need to plan a trip into the city. It's easy to shop for your new favorite workwear online by visiting rollingdworkwear.com and browsing their selection of premium made-in-Canada pieces. My personal favorite is the Home Farm Vest in the great green color. It's a versatile work piece that actually looks stylish. It's almost too nice to wear on the farm. You can get your hands on your new favorite workwear by heading to rollingdworkwear.com or by heading to the link in today's show notes. Join Rolling D Workwear's community of women who work outdoors by following them over on Facebook and Instagram at Rolling D Workwear. Mady, what are your future goals for yourself when it comes to agriculture?
I want to study to be an agriculture teacher at a university or a college because it offers both of what I want. I want to stay involved in the farm, but I also really love teaching.
Yeah, that is perfect. That sounds like it would be the perfect career for you.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your mom and what she does on your farm?
My mom, I think, is awesome because she runs equipment as well as doing office work on the farm. So she kind of sees both sides of it.
Right. Would you say that your mom is an inspiration to you for what she's done on the farm?
Yeah, she's taught me a lot.
Yeah, that's great. It's always good to have those role models so close to home, right?
Yeah.
Well, Mady, I always ask my guests on the Rural Woman podcast the same last question. And I'm going to ask you the same last question here too. Mady, what is the most rewarding part about being a farmer for you?
Well, I really love harvest and hanging out in the combine with my family, but I also really love scouting and learning how crops grow.
What is it about scouting that you like so much?
Well, I like seeing the progress of the crops so I can see how they grow and get some research of my own.
That is very good. Mady, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Like I said, I was really looking forward to being able to sit down and talk to you. And like I said before we hit record, this means that we are officially friends now that you've been on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the listeners who would like to connect with you after the show, where can they find you online?
On Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. My page is called Learning About Ag with Mady. You can also find my page on YouTube page that's also called Learning About Ag with Mady.
Great. And I will put those in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you. Can you also share with them about your hashtag and what you're doing over on Instagram?
So my hashtag is Ag with Mady. And for video 40, I used it to make a challenge called Where Does Your Food Come From? And I challenged people to tell me where their food came from, where their food was grown or produced.
That's so great.
I also recently made another challenge called The Agriculture Story, and I challenged people to connect with a farmer and ask any questions they have. And I challenged farmers to be willing to reach out to people who aren't in the industry and be willing to share their story.
Mady, why do you think it's important for farmers to share their stories?
I think it's important because people that don't have firsthand information, there's lots of people that want to learn more about agriculture. So I think we as farmers have a job to give them that information. Right.
Has there been any misinformation that you've had to help debunk over the last year or so online?
A little bit. Yeah. Not really much, though.
That's good. Well, it's important for us to share our stories, right? So people know where their food comes from and how it's grown, and for them to feel comfortable to come and ask a farmer where their food comes from and get that information right from the source.
Yeah.
Perfect. Mady, thank you so much for coming on the Rural Woman podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Mady Adamson. I know I sure did. I have to tell you that there's not a lot of interviews that I get very nervous conducting anymore, but I have to say I was kind of nervous to talk to Mady. And from the sounds of it, she was not nervous at all to talk to me because she is quite the professional. I highly encourage you to go and check out Mady over on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. From the looks of it, Mady is up to about 50 or so videos already. So she is doing incredible work as a young woman in agriculture and showing leadership for the next generation of farmers. Now, to give you a bit of an update, Mady was so looking forward to heading to Manitoba for Manitoba Ag Days, but unfortunately it was postponed until next year. So I'm sure Mady is going to be even more excited in 2023 to head to Manitoba. One other recent exciting thing that happened to Mady was she was invited to go and meet the Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, and spend the day with him. And she got to head to question period and meet a lot of the MLAs and just spend some time in the legislature with her and her family. So that was pretty cool to watch. So make sure you go and check out Mady on your social media platforms or head on over to YouTube. Now, as promised, I wanted to share with you some exciting things that have been happening, recently happened, or are happening for the Rural Woman podcast. So as I mentioned, we are in our third year. So March 19th, 2022 was the third anniversary of the Rural Woman podcast. And I'm so just blown away by, 3 whole years of being behind this microphone and well over 100 interviews with some incredible women in agriculture. And we have surpassed the 350,000 download mark, which, it just blows my mind that people keep on coming back each and every week and new people find out about the podcast. And some of these people are going all the way back and starting from episode 1 and working their way through. And I can't tell you the absolute honor and privilege it is for me to be able to continue to do this with the help of my team. And I am so very thankful for them. So as some of you may know, I have been able to grow my team over the last year or so. And I'm working with some amazing people like my editor, Max, and my virtual assistants, Bianca and Kim. So I'm very thankful for their help and their guidance and their support and them keeping me on track and all of the good work that they do, because if it wasn't for them, there wouldn't be a podcast each and every week. So thank you again to all of them. And like I mentioned before, thank you to all the patrons who contribute to the Rural Woman podcast each and every month. Your funds have helped me expand my team and keep these stories coming through your earbuds each and every week. I'm also super grateful for the sponsors that I've been able to have over the last year or so that have been growing. And I'm really looking forward to quarter 2 in 2022 with another great sponsorship that I'm really excited to share with you. If you are looking for ways to support the podcast, there are so many. One of them being just share it. Share it on your social media. Take a screenshot right now and share with your friends and tell them what you liked about this episode or any of the other episodes. That is a great way of getting more people aware of the podcast and getting new listeners. And new listeners are always welcome. And I'm always grateful for the people who have been here from the beginning. If you're looking to financially support the show and just say thank you for the work that me and my team are doing, you can head on over to patreon.com/The Rural Woman Podcast, and you can pledge your support to the show for any dollar amount. So that can be as little as $1 a month all the way up to whatever your heart desires. Perks and benefits of the show start at just $5 a month, which include ad-free listening. So if you like listening to the podcast without all of the ads, I totally get it. There is a tier for you. And starting at the $10 tier, you get the extras and the behind the scenes and my solo podcast, Maybe You Can Relate, along with other great things like gifts, goodies, and so much more. So again, if you're interested in learning more about that, you can head to patreon.com/The Rural Woman Podcast, or all of the links are in today's show notes. One last thing that I wanted to mention before I wrap it up here is I will be releasing a listener survey in the next few weeks here. This is a survey that we've developed over the last couple months here of really wanting to get to know you and really wanting to get to hear from you and what you love about the show, what you think could be improved about the show, and everything in between. So I'm so looking forward to that. So I will have more information for that soon. But if you would like to be one of the first people to know about the listener survey, you can head over to wildrosefarmer.com and jump in on my email list. Or if you want to get social with me in our private Facebook group, you can head to facebook.com/The Rural Woman Podcast Community, where there is a group of about 800 incredible women over there who we get to connect with one-on-one. As always, thank you so much for tuning in today, and we will see you back here real soon. Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producer, Sarah Riedner of Happiness by the Acre, and to my editor, Max Hofer. For show notes, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com. You can connect with me on social media using the handle @WildRoseFarmer on all platforms. If you love the show, make sure you're subscribed wherever you listen to podcasts, plus share it with a friend. We'll see you next time. This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon.